Reading, Week 4, Year 3 and 4. Lesson 1. Lesson focus. We'll be reading an extract from The Little Mermaid by Gabby Chant. We will look at how the author uses similes to build a picture of the Little Mermaid's underwater world. The unit learning objectives. We will be focusing on developing positive attitudes to reading and an understanding of what has been read by increasing familiarity with a wide range of books, including fairy stories, myths and legends, and retelling some of these. We will be reading an extract from The Little Mermaid by Gabby Chant. The children are familiar with vipers. This will be applied throughout the unit of learning. Today, we have a V. For vocabulary, we will be looking at the author's choice of language. So, at the start of every lesson, I will start to add which part of vipers we will be focusing on during that lesson. Let's recap vipers. So, V is for vocabulary. I, inference. P, prediction. E, explanation. R, retrieval. And S, summarize. Can you remember this from previous lessons that you have done? Learning objective: to develop positive attitudes to reading and an understanding of what is read by discussing words and phrases that capture the reader's interest and imagination. Success criteria: I can check that the text makes sense to me. I can also discuss the author's choice of language. I can even give examples of types of language used by the author. Vocabulary slides. So remember, if there are any words that you do not understand, you can use this website to look up the meaning. For people-friendly definitions, use co-build definitions. What do these all have in common? Shall we have a look? Jack and the Beanstalk. Cinderella. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Have you got it yet? Do you know what they all have in common? Let's look at some more. Puss in Boots. The Little Mermaid. And finally, Beauty and the Beast. What do they all have in common? Well done, they're all fairy tales. Once upon a time. Do you recognise this phrase? Where have you heard this or seen this? What genre does it come from? Do you know? Well done. Yes, it is an opening for a fairy tale. So, what other ingredients are needed for a fairy tale? Think of any fairy tales that you have read and what other ingredients were in this fairy tale. Let's have a look, shall we? So maybe there's a curse, a fairy, a witch. There may be talking animals, or there may be an orphan child. The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. The fairy tale was first published in Denmark in 1837 and written by a Danish author called Hans Christian Andersen. The story is about a young mermaid who is the youngest of 5 sisters. She has never seen the world above the sea, but she has heard many stories about the land of humans. There are many different versions of the fairy tale, written by different authors. Okay, let's read an extract from the fairy tale. This is a version written by Gabby Chant. Far, far away from here, there was once an ocean that was deeper than man can measure. Above the surface, the water looked as dark as ink and as cold as glass, and it seemed a lonely and dangerous place. But deep beneath the waves, that was a different story. Right down in the depths of the water, 1,000 times deeper than any living human had ever dived, there lay a castle. The castle was hidden behind forests of tangled seaweed and guarded by fish of such curious and startling colours that you and I would gasp to see them. Its walls and turrets were fashioned from shells and crab claws and coral, and within its halls there stood a throne, carved from an enormous pearl, and on that throne there sat a sea king. He was a good and wise ruler, but a great sadness lay heavy on his heart. His queen had died many years before. All that he had left to remember her was their 6 lovely daughters, 6 sea princesses, who, just like their father, had no legs. Each of their bodies ended in a fish's tail. Now, it was custom of the kingdom that when each of the sea princesses had their 15th birthday, they were permitted to swim to the surface of the ocean, to look upon the world above the water for a single day. The 5 eldest sea princesses had each already had this privilege. They had returned to the castle with stories of feathered fish that swam through the air, and of strange wooden wells that floated on the surface of the water, and of a huge round shell that burned in the sky as brightly as lava that burst from underwater volcanoes. The little sea princess listened to her elder sister's stories, and she longed for the day that she too would turn 15 and be able to rise to the ocean's surface. She spent her days using stones and seaweed to make pictures on the seabed of all her sisters had told her, and at night she dreamed of feeling the warmth of that bright round shell on her skin. At long last, the little mermaid's 15th birthday arrived. Up, up she swam through the water, as light as a bubble. The higher she rose, the brighter the blue of the ocean became, and the water grew less and less cold, until at last the tips of her fingers broke the surface of the water, and she emerged, glittering with salt water, into the mild sea air. And oh, what was this gigantic dark shape before her? A huge floating creature made of wood, just as her sisters had described, with vast white fins. And what a great noise it was making! The creak of its bones as it moved towards her, and its voice like 100 different voices all shouting at once. Would it eat her? The little sea princess shrank back into the sea until just her eyes and the top of her head peeped out above the surface of the water. She looked as sleek as a seal, bobbing there in the waves with her hair wet against her skull. She held her breath and watched with a fast beating heart as the creature drew ever closer. Vocabulary. We will look at some of the vocabulary the author has used. So, its walls and turrets were fashioned from shells and crab claws and coral. I've highlighted 2 words in red. Turrets. Do you know what turrets are? Okay, let's have a look. So turrets are a smaller tower, or they are at the corner of a castle. Fashioned. What do you think fashioned means? Fashioned is having a fashion or style. Permitted. What does permitted mean? Do you know? Okay, let's have a look. So, if you're permitted, you're allowed to do something. Privilege. What does privilege mean? Do you know? Let's have a look, shall we? So privilege is an opportunity to do something special or enjoyable. Vast. What does vast mean? Do you know? Let's have a look. So when something is vast, it is extremely big. Sleek. What does sleek mean? Do you know? Let's look. So when something is sleek, it is smooth and glossy. Can you remember what a simile is? That's right, it is a way of describing something by comparing it to something else, that it is similar. So why do you think the author chose to use as light as a bubble to describe the way the Little Mermaid swam rather than as light as a feather? Why do you think the author did this? Let's have a look. So we associate bubbles with water, and so this image works better than that of a feather because it helps us to build a picture of the Little Mermaid's underwater world. Task. So you will now need to go through the text again and see if you can find any similes. You could even use a highlighter or pen to underline them to help you. You will then need to describe what each simile is describing. Remember to write your answers on your worksheet. Plenary. Have a look at this picture and see if you can write a simile for this picture.